So recently I've been thinking about data classes. I'm hearing a lot about data classes in Python. Apparently it's a new feature. So I wanted to try it out, right? And to actually understand it, you have to first understand the way we work with classes in Python, the way we want to store data. So for instance, let's say I want to create a Python class for storing some information about people. What I'll do is to probably have something like, I'll create a class, maybe a person class, and that would have an init method like so, and this init method will take in the stuff about the person, so maybe name, which would be a string, phone number, so maybe phone, or just use number, and this will probably be a string, and maybe some, I don't know, age for instance, right? So age for instance would be an int, right? Something like this. And here what I'll do is something like self.name equals name, and what self.number equals number. Then I would also do something like self.age equals age, right? This is like the usual way of doing it, right? Let me just put a doc string here so that Python to stop worrying me. Person data class, right? And YouTube demo, normal way. So you'd go ahead and do something like this, right? You go ahead and create a class like this, and if you wanted to use it, you create like a main function. Let me close this for now. Right? You could create like a main function, and in here you will create a person and be like, this is a person, and then you call it and give it what? A name, because maybe Paul, my name, and you could give it like a number, right? Some number, right? And then you could give it an age, right? Something like this, right? You go ahead and create a person object. Then you could like access the person, right? You could go ahead and do like what? Person dot name, right? So you could go ahead and like print that out. Maybe something like, I'm just printing it out for demonstration purposes, right? No, not this. It's a comma here. And you could go ahead and like basically do the same thing. Right? Where here you would be like, what's person dot maybe age, and give an age over here. I mean, let's go ahead and print out the person itself like as an object, and then you could go ahead and be like, what if name is equal to what? Main, which just means that the app is running from this file. Then you should just call this. I mean, this is like just standard stuff in Python, right? But you'd go ahead and like do something like this. Main function, entry point, right? You go ahead and create something like this, right? Where you create a person class. Go ahead and create like a person class, which will define the structure of the kind of data that you want to store in here. The person has a name, a number, and an age. We go ahead like and create this kind of thing. So I mean, this is like purely natural. So if I go ahead and run this, you'd realize that, you know, this is what the name is, this, the age is this, and then when you print out the person, you'd get like a memory location. And how you usually do this is to probably either define a EPR, yeah, you define this method in here and be like, this should probably return a string, something like an F string, which would comprise of the person's name, right? You could have something like this. Maybe self.age, something like this. And right now, if I go ahead and print the person, I wouldn't be getting a memory location anymore. I would be getting that kind of string representation, right? I mean, this is purely natural, our usual way of doing stuff, the way that we usually approach. There's an issue here. It says what? trailing white space, where, alright, anyway, yeah, this is usually the way that we do things, right? You go ahead and create a class, and then if you add this representation, the method means that whenever you try to like print out this or refer to this, it would like rather call this. I mean, there's also another one for the string version of it. Whenever you try to convert it to a string, right? This is how we do things, right? But since that update to Python where they added the data classes, it's kind of like an improvement on this to prevent us from doing this, right? So if you go ahead to the documentation where we are talking about data classes here, they say that the data class module provides a decorator and functions for automatically adding generated special methods, such as this standard init, the one that we wrote here for the initial thing, and also for adding that the representation method that we just defined right now, right? So you're telling us that something like this, if you were to like use the decorator data class and write something like this, you could end up they would end up adding the init function, the constructor, to the class that you have already defined. So this function would automatically be added to it by Python. It just makes things for us when we are thinking of storing data and we are not thinking so much about the methods that are in the classes, right? So in that case, this thing that we have done over here could as well be done this way. Let me just create a new class where I be like a new file where I call it what, using dataclasses.py, right? So basically the same thing that we have done over here could be done by creating a class person, right? But before we create this, we have to like what, import, or maybe from data classes, import data class, and here we will basically just add a decorator data class like this. And by adding this decorator data class, right, by adding this decorator data class, if you were to just write the thing straight for it like this without that init function, it would end up adding it to it for us automatically. So you could, we have what's a name, so you could just be like, well, the name is a string, and you have what a number, which is also a string, and you have what an age, which is also a string, right? Something like this. Fairly easy, makes sense, right? Just going to add YouTube demo using data class, something like this. I just want like Python to take away the errors. Data class for storing person information. Something like this, right? You go ahead and create something like this. And of course, if you were to just go ahead and copy this same main function and and its definitions from here up to and paste it here, then you realize that if we go ahead and run this code again, the newer version, we have something slightly different. We have what, the name, same way, age, same way, but then now if you realize when you try to print out the person, it seems that representation function method has already been added to the class for us. So, and it has like, it tells you that what, it's a person, it has a name this and name this, like, and this is pretty cool. Like, when you look at it, instead of writing all of this with all these methods and doing self dot what, you just have to like use data classes and write it like this, and it makes it your code look simpler and better. This is way nicer than having to write all of this just to store a couple of information, maybe some two fields of like the person, some two information about the person. Think about it, right? And also there are other things that you could actually do inside here. So if you call this as a function, you could actually specify what exactly, like some properties that you want over here. So if you go ahead back to the documentation, you'd realize that so The first one that we talk about is the data class, and it has a lot of things in here. So it has like what? An init, which basically tells Python to add an init function, to add an repr function to it also. So if I were to change this repr to false in here, if I were to change repr to false in here, I believe that when we print this out, we won't get the name that we got. We ended up getting the Python thing with the location again. I mean, I hope you get what I'm trying to say. So you have like that kind of customization to give. You could give all of this. You could decide to also freeze the class, when it is frozen, for instance. So if I say frozen equal to true, it means that if I say frozen equal, not double equal to, one equals, right? Yeah, if I say frozen equal to true, I can't come here and now come and do person.age is equal to maybe 88, for instance, right? Previously, you could do that. I mean, if it was this regular one, you could do that. But by saying that this is equal to frozen, if I go ahead and try and assign a value to the initial value that I was given, you realize that I'll be getting an error. Yeah, from there. You cannot assign field. You cannot assign to field age, right? Just by adding this frozen equal to true parameter over here, it stops me from doing that. I mean, by default, it is false, right? So if this wasn't there, and it's just like run this, I could reassign it and it works perfectly. I hope that makes sense, right? And the other things over here like keyword only, which says that keyword argument only, right? So for this, it means that here, before I could write something like this just by making sure that they are in order. I could write something like this to create a function, and it will be able to like match these in the same order that these are, right? If you were to look at it over here, you'll be able to match the name, the number, and the age to the same order that I passed them to it. But if I were to say keyword only to be true, if I set keyword only to be true, this wouldn't be possible because it means that I would now have to be forced to use keyword argument to create this object, to create this instance of the class, right? This is unexpected keyword argument, keyword only. Wasn't that what we saw? Yeah, keyword only. Weird. So yeah, if you go to the definition of this, I believe it's my version of Python actually. So if I like update my version of Python, this shouldn't be a problem because if you look at it, the version of Python that I have right now doesn't have that keyword only. But the understanding is that if you were to specify that keyword only variable, then that would actually force you to have to use keyword arguments over here when you are trying to initialize this instance of the class. That's how that works, right? I mean, I can't demonstrate that right now because I don't have that version of Python installed on my machine, right? But then basically, data classes are supposed to take some of the work off your hands when you are trying to create a class purposely for storing data. So if you are trying to create a class just for storing information about some person object or some credit card object or something like that, it's best to use data class to do that. And of course, you could go ahead and give a default value to these things. So you could give this and the default value of 50, for instance, just by doing an equal to here, right? And if you go ahead and do that and I take this off, I have to stop reassigning this as well and put the brackets closing over here. Now if I try to like run this, I get that as the default value, age being 50, right? And then there are other things that you could do. You could go ahead and give this an empty list like this, right? You could go ahead and give this an empty list, right? But then there is one caveat when it comes to assigning default values, and I'll explain that to you, right? So given this empty list here, for instance, right? If I try to create person 1 and let me just remove the age and call it sum or items. Let me call it items, for instance, right? So you're supposed to be a list of string. I'm just giving it a type, right? So now if I'm creating person 1, let me just stop printing out these, right? And I also create person So, and I do something like person1 dot items should now be equal to, let's say, hello, right? Then I create person2 as person with a name of what? Sorry, with a name of what? Person2, a number of maybe something like this, right? And I try to, so if I try doing something like this, let's just observe what's going to happen, right? So it says what? Value error, mutable default, this for field items is not allowed. Use default factory. So that the understanding is that whenever you assign a default value like this and you are trying to mutate it, there is a problem. So what the data classes comes with is a field function over here, which you could use to give this a default value. So you do something like this, should be a field with a default factory being a list. So what will happen is that when this is being executed, this function or whatever you pass over here is going to be executed, and whatever it returns would be like the default value of this. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how it's going to work if you try to like do something like this. This to make sure like every instance has a different version of the list. Initially, if you were to just put a list over there, what will happen is that every instance would be referencing the same list, and that is a problem. So by using this function that comes with the data classes directly, you get the chance to like give it a default value without like messing around with how the data is supposed to be stored in memory. I don't know if this makes sense, but then the underlying concept is that the data classes that comes with Python nowadays is solely to make your life easier when you think about storing data and information about something using Python classes, right? So this is how data classes are essentially. So if you are someone like me who has not used it since it came, I've not actually like had a feel of it because I've not like had to use data classes, right? If you are someone like me and you'd like to have an idea of what exactly data classes do and you want to you want to start using them, this is your chance. So something like this talks about how the field can be used, right? So if you were to do this would work, right? I mean, right now if I try to do the same thing again, you realize that this person one gets the items being updated and then the old person like gets the old one. I mean, this is like standard. It makes sense, right? So yeah, like I was saying, if you're someone who just heard about the word data classes and you'd like to start using them, I would really suggest that you come and have a look at the documentation. It's good to be reading documentation. I realize that a lot of people don't like to read documentations, but personally I think that reading the documentation gives you a lot of information that you don't get from just watching a YouTube video or googling your way out of things, right? Documentation gives you facts about the thing that you are using, right? But yeah, this is all for data classes. I'll try and use them more, and you should also use them more. But yeah, that's all I'd like to say about data classes. I hope after watching this video you'll be able to have an idea of how data classes work and you'd start using data classes in your day-to-day activities. I mean, I don't know what kind of code you've been writing, but hey, get out of here and go and code. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.